My definition is doing or saying what you would do or say when you would do or say it. What is authentic for Kyle is different than what's authentic for Tracy. That's what makes it authentic. The greatest power is in that first moment where you notice that's not what you would do.
Right. Welcome back, Wellness Ninjas, to another episode of the Wellness Dojo Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Craik, and today I'm very excited to have our special guest, Tracy Borreson, is here. Tracy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kyle. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to chat with you. I was saying to you when we were first talking about this, I'm like, I just love your energy. Anytime we interact, I absolutely love your energy, and so excited to have that energy on the show today.
Excited to share it with everyone.
So your LinkedIn profile says, I hope I don't get it wrong, but it says Authentic Marketing Advisor, I believe. Is that correct?
What it says, yes.
So I'm sure you get lots of different labels like brand coach and those types of things, but I'd like to hear it from you. Who is Tracy? What do you do? Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself first?
I always think who is Tracy is a much bigger question than anybody has time for.
So true.
But I think the important part is that, I didn't always know how to answer that question. There was lots of times in my past where if someone would have asked me, who is Tracy? I would have been like, I'm the VP of marketing at XYZ company.
Yeah.
Right? Which is very common for people. But about 4 years ago now, I went on what I call my authenticity journey, which was based on me trying to figure out who is Tracy Borreson. And I think that's important to keep in mind for people today is that, this has been a 4-year journey for me. There's lots of time left for you if you still are in the throes of what you might not consider authenticity. But let's start with my definition of authenticity, because we're going to use the word a lot today. Mm-hmm. And there's actually a lot of definitions of it. If you look it up online, there's 5 definitions in a single online dictionary.
It's which definition is the most authentic?
And I mean, when you know you're testing that, then it's interesting to look at it. But so I've come up with my own definition because I find it easier. My definition is doing or saying what you would do or say when you would do or say it.
I love that.
And so I like the simplicity of it. The point being that nobody besides you knows if you should say something, if you want to stand for something. And there's no one right time for that to exist. If you want to say it, then say it. But that doesn't mean you have to say it. The authenticity is in you decide. And even I hang out a lot on LinkedIn. There's a lot of LinkedIn coaches. They'll tell you this is the way you do authenticity. That's not a thing. Mm-hmm. Okay. What is authentic for Kyle is different than what's authentic for Tracy. That's what makes it authentic. So it's a self-discovery process that every individual has to go through on their own. It's not something that someone else can tell you, do this, do this, do this, do this. In my journey, I've done a lot of things that were not authentic. I tried things. I actually remember saying once to my son out loud after responding to something he had done that I was just like, that's not what I would do. I take that back. It's I tried it on. I'm not even sure where that came from, but it's not what I would do. So just forget I said that.
Yeah.
And he was 3 at the time. So then he was really confused. But what are you going to do? It's an ongoing journey. It's a guess and test scenario. It's the skill of asking yourself the question, what would I do? And being able to come up with something that feels good to you. And even if someone else is well, that's not really authentic, you don't get to decide what's authentic for me and what's not. And then the interesting thing about that, because a lot of times people will want to be more authentic so they can improve their relationships or a brand or reputation or anything like that. And the thing is I don't control your experience of me. So I can show up and I can be authentic. Most people will interpret that as authentic, but I don't decide. I just feel it how I feel it. And that's what it's all about. And I'm sure a lot of other complexities are going to come up in the conversation. But yeah. And then I try to do that in all parts of my life. So I try to do that in parenting. I try to do that in my partnership with my husband. I try to do that with my parents. I try to do it with my sisters. I try to do it with my clients. I try to do it with everybody. So regardless of whether you're a client and I'm helping you figure out what to do on a podcast, or figure out how to take your most recent engineering paper and turn it into marketing, or if I'm sitting at home with my son trying to help him understand his emotions, is the beingness is the same, the Tracy-ness of it the same. And that's what I think is the key in authenticity, when all of that foundation can feel aligned, and the manifestations might look different in different parts of your life, but you feel the same.
Yeah. I think there's some really interesting, I don't even know if I would call it overlap, but with branding and being authentic and uniquely you, I think there's some really interesting things there. But before I ask you about that, I'm curious, you mentioned you tried something on, like you tried on this thing in front of your son and you were like, this isn't me. Do you remember what it was?
I totally remember what it was. So it was when we were potty training him. And we were not successful for a very long time. So there's a level of frustration that happens there.
Yeah.
And he was sitting on our bed, like my husband's bed, and I had to go to the bathroom. So I asked him, do you have to go to the bathroom? He's like, nope. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go and I will be right back. How long does it take to go to the bathroom? 2 minutes, maybe. Come back. He's peed on the bed. And so I pick him up and I take him to the tub and I'm like, no toys, no TV until you go pee in the potty.
Yeah.
And as soon as it came out of my mouth, I was like, I wouldn't do that. Like, this kid is learning a skill. It's like riding a bike. He doesn't know how to do it. Now I'm punishing him because he doesn't know how to do it. That's not what I would do. And so, like, as soon as it came out of my mouth, I was like, that's not what I would do. I'm sorry. Yes, we need to get you cleaned up, but like, we'll do that and then we'll figure out what we're going to do next. But it's not that. And I think it's good to be able to show our kids, one, that we make mistakes and that we can correct them.
For sure.
Because then they understand that they can make mistakes and correct them, or make an assumption about how they might respond and then feel it and be like, wow, that's not right for me.
Yeah.
How might I do that differently next time? And we can always learn. We can probably learn more from our mistakes than we learn from the things we get right.
Yeah. When you mentioned like you caught yourself in the moment, you're like, oh, this isn't me.
Yeah.
I think that's a real skill.
It is, yeah.
Right? Because so many people get caught, I think, in that cycle of that frustration, like an exact moment like that where there's parents who they will start to identify as like, well, that's just me. I'm just reactive.
Right.
That's just me. I'm just always angry all the time, or I'm always negative.
Right.
It's easy to get stuck into those identities. So can you talk a little bit about that skill? Like, is that something you always had?
No. My mindset journey began about 10 years ago. And so that scenario with my son was about 3 years ago. So got 7 years of practice under my belt at that point. And to begin with, this is actually something I say to a lot of people in a lot of scenarios, is that the greatest power is in that first moment where you notice that's not what you would do. Because just like you said, a lot of times we get into it and then we think like, oh no, we did that, so now we can't recover from it. I just have to like keep going with it. Right?
Is that like a gut feeling in that moment?
It was.
Yeah.
And it's skills come from practice. And so in order to get good at a skill, you have to practice it. So whether that's a martial art, I grew up playing basketball, right? Like the reason people get good at free throws is because they shoot and they shoot and they shoot and they shoot and they miss and they miss and they shoot and they shoot. And then your coach makes you stand there until you get 10 in a row. And I don't even know how many you miss, but it's a lot before you get 10 in a row. You do it a lot and you miss a lot of times. And when we're building our like personal development skills or authenticity skills, people don't do the practice because they're concerned about the miss. But like my demonstration right now with my son, that was a miss, right? I did not get it right. And when you're looking for something, you're more likely to find it than if you're not looking for something. And so if you're actively in the process of exploring why you feel so reactive or what's making you frustrated, or, I mean, you could test this in a variety of different scenarios, but then what happens is as soon as you notice, so your focus is on identifying the emotion, right? So let's use frustration as an example. My attention was on whether or not I'm feeling frustrated. So instead of getting invested in my response to being frustrated, I noticed I was frustrated and stopped and thought about what's going on here. Why am I frustrated? I'm frustrated because I think he should know better. But I don't actually believe that, right? I don't actually believe he should know better. He's never done this ever before in his life. And like, he's only ever peed in a diaper. How is he supposed to? I mean, there's some things we have to teach our kids, which are very difficult because you don't remember how you learned how to do it. And then you're like, I don't know how to teach this as a parent, or as a partner, or as a coach, or whatever. And so if we can practice first the skill of noticing, then we have the opportunity to pause. And then we have the opportunity to learn from getting curious about that. So instead of filling the space with more response, we can fill the space with curiosity. And then we can figure out like, oh, wow, I'm totally frustrated because I think he should do that. But I don't actually think he should do that. Okay. Erase. All of a sudden, I'm not feeling frustrated anymore. And I can get back to, okay, I have to clean up this mess. I have to clean up this mess. And then, I don't know, whatever we were practicing was not working, right? So let's try practicing something else.
Yeah. It's interesting because we hear a lot like, you are not your emotions.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, like, we kind of are our emotions, or at least our emotions, in my opinion, are signals.
Yes.
Right? And that word curiosity, I think it's just so overlooked, but so powerful for people to just get curious in those moments. Right? Yeah.
I actually wrote a blog post ages ago called Emotions as Traffic Lights. And there are emotions that we feel that we give ourselves full permission to feel because they're quote unquote good emotions. Joy, happiness, peace, calm, tranquility, whatever, fill in the category with whatever. Because if you're experiencing that, your body and your mind are probably saying, green light, feel more of this, right? Go. And then there's the yellow emotions where you're like, not quite sure. It doesn't feel great, but it doesn't necessarily feel bad. Like confusion is a good example, right? Like, I'm not really sure how I feel about this. And then I think this is predominantly society has defined as red emotions, anger, sadness, frustration, these types of things. And as red light emotions, they make us feel like we want to stop. We want to get rid of them, right? Like we don't want to feel fear. We don't want to feel sadness. We want to get rid of that. We want to stop. And the interesting thing is, one, you cannot go through your life without feeling those emotions. It's not possible. Maybe if you're a robot, but not if you're a human. And so if we just use them like we use traffic lights, they're giving us an indication of something. Okay, well, this is telling me something. What is this telling me? And okay, is it society telling me I shouldn't feel this? Or is it like, I mean, there's a lot of people who have anger issues because they try to suppress their anger instead of expressing their anger. And there are healthy, safe ways to express anger, and there are not healthy, safe ways to express anger. And like stuffing it down inside of you isn't either of those things. It's just pretending they don't exist, which isn't true. Then you start to get all the poison just bottled up in your body, and then people experience burnout or illness and things like that. The point is, this is telling me something. And what is this telling me? And I think the other important thing, I've been talking about this a lot lately. It's very relevant to my family situation right now. Okay. But like, my son, he's 6 now. He keeps using the phrase, "You're making me angry." And so I'm like, okay, so let's just separate this. You're feeling angry. That is valid. I'm not making you angry. Something about what you're thinking about the situation is making you angry. So what is that? Let's explore. What is it? Is it that a very common one, and it will sound silly because it's like a kid experience, but this is his experience, right? Daddy wants to tickle me, but I don't want him to. So daddy's making me angry. No, you're angry at daddy's action. You could tell him not to tickle you or ask you not to tickle because it's making you angry. And he probably will listen to you, at least in our household. It's not necessarily true everywhere, but like, the point is that is to own that the emotion is yours and to accept that there are things I can do with my thoughts that can help me move through this emotion. And I can't control someone else's actions, but I can control my thoughts about the situation. And it's really interesting because like I didn't learn any of these skills until like 5-ish years ago, right? My son is 6. So now I'm trying to create a like I don't even know what that's going to look like when you start to build that skill set when you're a kid versus like as an adult trying to heal from childhood trauma. But the point is that there's an ownership there. And then that is also something that's intricately tied into authenticity, because if you can own those types of things, you can stop blaming other people for your response and look inside and say, how is it me making me feel this way? Then all of a sudden you take all your power back and you can create healthy boundaries between your energy and other people's energy. You can have that level of confidence to say like, this is me and this is how I do it. And if someone else doesn't like it, that's their problem. It's not my problem. And you just create the space for yourself.
Yeah, I love that you're using that language and like separating that language with your kid. I mean, not that I have any influence on your parenting, but it's just as somebody who has experienced seeing other people, like adults especially, who really struggle to hear that sometimes, where it's like, no, I'm not making you angry. You're angry, right? Or I'm not making you sad right now. You're feeling sad. But like you need to explore why you're feeling those feelings. That's not something a lot of adults want to hear. They want like either the fight or they want you to sympathize with them. And, you know, there's a big difference between sympathy and empathy, right? Because people want sympathy, but oftentimes when you are empathetic towards them, you don't get that same response.
Right.
That's just what popped in my mind when you were saying that, is like adults need this mental shift of like, no, these are my emotions. You're not causing this. I am. And it's something I've had to go through in my life too, where I thought like certain periods of my life where you're like, everything bad is happening to me. It's like, if this person didn't do this, I wouldn't feel this way and stuff. But at the end of the day, like you said, it's just signals, right? And
it's interesting because once you get into the practice, then you start to see, quote unquote, results, success, whatever you want to call it. But the thing is that like we had this really great success at our house where trying to get my son to brush his teeth before going to school, which is a conversation every single day. Why do I have to brush? You have to brush your teeth, okay? I'm not only going to break this down so many times for you.
I've got older kids. I'm just telling you, like, at least in my experience, it doesn't get that much easier. So
anyway, so like we're going up the stairs and he just is like, like he yells so loud, right? And I know it's not about me, so I'm like letting him like process his emotion of frustration. But we get into the bathroom and he looks at me and he's like, Mom, I'm not yelling at you.
Oh, sure.
I'm just frustrated that I have to brush my teeth. And I was like, I'm so proud of you right now.
That's amazing.
Like, and because that's good, right? It's good to have ways to express your frustration. I can't guarantee that I am never going to do something that's going to frustrate you. Two humans in close proximity to each other at some point are going to do something that annoys the other one, regardless of how much you love each other, right? And so from a partnership, from a parenting, from a sibling perspective, it is just going to happen. And being able to like take that moment and be like, this is a me thing, right? Like, I'm feeling frustrated. That was my expression of frustration. It doesn't have, I'm not mad at you. Can you imagine if we could just all say that as adults?
Yeah.
And just be like, I'm sorry. I was behind this really slow Jeep on the way here and I was so frustrated and I yelled in the car, but I wasn't yelling at you. I just needed to get it out of my body. Like, it could be so productive. It could be helpful in work environment.
Yeah.
Like, it actually could be productive everywhere. But a friend of mine, Kira Day, she runs an organization called the Passion Center in Toronto. And she talks about emotion, our emotional alphabet, and how the challenge with emotions is that unlike the actual alphabet, it's not the same for everyone. So I can't teach it to everyone the same way I would teach something standard like the alphabet. I have to figure it out for myself. And we don't go through that exercise when we're kids. Most of us, this is my experiment with my son. It's like, what does that look like when you do go through that as a kid? But even for him, right, like, no one else in his class is doing that activity. And then I'm the parent who sent him to school. I'm not saying he doesn't get in trouble. He had to go to the principal's office because he punched another kid in the face. Normally he's very even keeled. But our answer to that, or our activity coming out of that one, was to write apology card to the kid who he punched and give him some of his Halloween candy. But also we made emotion cards. And so we made these like 3x5 cards, and each one had an emotion, and I had him pick the color, right? So like, if you're experiencing sadness, what color does that feel like? And he colored the cards. And then on the back, we said, like, what can we do if we're feeling these emotions? So if you're feeling angry, what can you do? I can walk away. I can take a deep breath. And he came up with all of the things, because I don't want to tell you what to do. I want you to look at, what would you do? What do you think could actually convert that emotion to something different?
Yeah.
And he took them to school for 3 days in his pocket. And first of all, he was like, so if I'm angry, I can show someone the angry card. And I was like, not quite. What you can do, though, is if you're feeling angry, you can look at the angry card and feel empowered to know that there's something you can do about that. And he took them to school for 3 days, and then he's like, Mom, I don't think I need these cards anymore. And I was like, The kids are very smart, by the way. They can learn these things way quicker than adults can. Yeah. But it's cool to see that, right? And that's the point, is that he, one, explores what would I do in this scenario, because he wouldn't punch a kid in the face, right? And he's seen other people do that, so that's what he did. It did not make him feel good. Like, I picked him up from school, and he, like, if it was me, I probably would have thrown up from, like, all of the emotions I was having. And I was actually proud of him, too, because the principal was like, he calmed himself down with breathing. And I was like, go 5-year-old.
Yeah, let's go.
5-year-old power, right? But, like, owning those skills, right? And being like, I can do this. Even if that means, I don't know, adults can take emotion cards to work in their pocket, right? Like, who says you can't, right? You could. And then you're empowered to do something.
Yeah. I had Kelly Rudy on the podcast. I don't know. Do you know who Kelly Rudy is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was on the podcast about a year ago-ish. And he spoke to me about how he keeps a card at the desk when he's doing, like, hockey night in Canada. And it's just kind of very similar to what you just described, where it's a reminder for him when he starts to feel anxious and those types of things. It's just that little reminder to recognize it, acknowledge it, kind of, and then you just deal with it, right? I feel like, just based on this conversation right now too, that emotions can really block that authenticity if we aren't recognizing them and kind of utilizing those skills to control them.
If we're stuffing down emotions, we can't learn enough about ourselves to actually be a full expression of authentic. I think there's also a complexity with authenticity, is that you can only be as authentic as you are self-aware.
Yeah.
And so the interesting thing is that, like, if I look back on my corporate life and how I used to show up at work, it's not that I'm not being authentic. I'm just being as authentic as I can be at the time with, at that point, pretty much no self-awareness skills, no mindset skills, right? Like I didn't have a toolbox in that scenario. And so my abilities now, after 10 years of practice, look much different on me than they did before. But it's not that like the old version of me was trying not to be authentic, right? Like I was going to work and being like, I'm going to pretend I'm not myself. Right? I just wasn't as much myself because I couldn't see as much of myself. Yeah. And just like in the Shrek scenario, like an onion, right? Like we have a lot of different layers and we have a lot of different expectations that people have put on us over time that we have made true or we have told ourselves stories about. And we have societal narratives and we have cultural narratives and we have all of these. You become a parent and then there's a parental narrative based on what you saw from parenting and you liked what your parents did sometimes and you didn't like what your parents did other times. So then you copy them or you do the exact opposite. And the thing is, you're still not doing what you would do. You're either doing what they did or you're doing the exact opposite of that, which is only one option in a whole variety of options of things that you can do. And so the journey through self-awareness is what gives you a greater capacity for full expression of authenticity. But it's a very complex topic in general.
But yeah, self-awareness is definitely massive for that. And you mentioned also recognizing things that were kind of taught to you, I guess, like through your parents and stuff. I think that's also really big. And that's something like I think we continue to learn as adults as well. And maybe especially as adults where you're like, why am I the way that I am? Like I'm on this like kind of journey right now of like, why do I do this? And like, why do I do that? Like really trying to understand myself more. And I recognize those things by watching my kids, by watching my parents, by watching even the people that I spend the most time around. And it's a really interesting thing that does kind of bring to light that self-awareness of like, why do I do this? Right.
And there's also, there's a lot of things in our lives we can question, right? You could find yourself constantly questioning something about your life. But I think the important thing about that questioning is to this also takes practice, but to remove the identity from it. So when you're asking yourself questions like, why am I doing that? To take away not necessarily the accountability, but like the emotion attached to the accountability. So things like shame or guilt that like, oh, why am I doing that? We can't get there through those emotions. We need to get there through a detachment of sorts, of figuring out, like actually no ownership in that, because I didn't choose that, right? I'm just exploring that, and almost like exploring it like you're a third party looking at it from the outside in. I'm being like, this is curious. So I'll use an example. I think it was for my son's 4th birthday. I posted something about it. We were going to the Space and Science Center. And I posted it on LinkedIn because I post most of the things that I do on LinkedIn. And I had a connection who like messaged me back and was saying like, it's really irresponsible to post anything about our kids on social media. And it's not an uncommon perspective. And this gentleman is more in the like boomer age category. And so like, fair is fair, but my experience of that, what I heard him say in that message was that I'm a bad mom, right? And so I had an emotional response to I'm a bad mom. And that's like very common, right? Especially in the parenting scenario. A lot of us feel like we're incapable in a lot of those scenarios, and then we'll think we're a bad mom, and then we get the whole mom guilt thing. I don't know if it's the same with dad guilt, but like
for sure.
Yeah. So there's this guilt that's associated with that. Then I shouldn't have, and then you get into the shoulds and it's a downward spiral that's
don't shit on
out
yourself,
there. Right. Yeah. And so it was interesting. So again, because I've practiced these skills. So then what I'm like, I'm feeling an emotional response to this message. it's my son's birthday. I'm going to just leave it and we're going to go and we're going to have a good time. I'll come back later and I'll explore why this made me feel so terrible. And then that's what I discovered. What I read in this is you're a bad mom. That's not what he said. Okay. And I'm not a bad mom. Like, do I think that that's true, that I'm a bad mom? Absolutely no, I don't. Right? And I'm also not, I mean, I'm a marketer, right? Like, I don't have fear of social media, right? Like, and my kid is 6 and he's a generation alpha and he's growing up in the world of technology, right? I don't believe it's helpful for him to be afraid of technology. I think he needs to understand how to responsibly use technology. But like, my whole experience isn't this gentleman's experience. And then it was really interesting because coming out of that, I was like, you know, it's actually really sweet that he would care that much about me to send that message, because it would be really easy not to do that. So then, like, upon reflection, I then get to get rid of the emotions, recreate the I'm a good mom, and also celebrate that I have a good friend who is like looking out for me and for my son, who I met on LinkedIn, right? Like, that's some pretty cool things to take away as wins from what originally started off being a like, I feel really terrible about this. So it's interesting to look at those things because you don't know what you can find.
It's a good perspective shift. And you just reminded me of, so earlier this week I went and did this hike, and it was an organized
the vision hike.
The vision hike.
I couldn't go to it, but so Kim Westland, shout out to Kim, she organized it. And so this group got together, we went and did this hike, and one of the, like, when we got to the peak, we got to the top, it was like, what are our thoughts? Like, we were going through some exercises and like, what are our thoughts? And one of the number one things that we had all kind of experienced was when you are able, like, how small things seem when you're up, or how big things seem when you're up close, but then when you step back, how everything's like so much smaller, and you gain this like new perspective on things. And that sounds like a lot what you were just describing through your story is, in the moment you have this like thing that seems so big, and then you step outside of it, and you walk away from it for a minute, and when you come back, you can have worked through some of those emotions, or at least let them relax a little bit, and you can see things differently, right? And you can see things just through a brand new lens, I think, which is so cool. Something also with that hike, so there was an exercise that we went through, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, because one of the things that came up for me was, anytime I get these questions about like, what is uniquely you, like what makes you unique from anytime, if it's a personal thing or if it's a business thing. And so this is where that branding crossover, I think, really comes in, is we always are told like we need to find that niche, we need to find like what's unique to you. I always get super overwhelmed with that question, where I'm like, I think about it where I'm like, okay, I know like what my skills are, I know kind of what my strengths are, where my weaknesses are for the most part, but is it unique to me? And the comment that I made when we were standing up there, I said, you know, my strengths are, I'm very empathetic. I'm a super empathetic person. I'm very kind, and I do a really good job of like taking my personal experiences and being able to help other people by using those experiences. But is that unique to me? I'm like, I'm surrounded on LinkedIn and Instagram and all these different places, and even the people that I surround myself with in my life, they're all empathetic people, because those are the people I choose to be around, right? And so I'm curious your opinion on that, on like finding that uniqueness or understanding your uniqueness. Okay, so first of all, we are very judgy of ourselves. Yes, we're our biggest critics. It's one of the biggest benefits of having a coach is that they can look at you from that third person perspective, and they can reflect back to you something that you probably don't see. Because we are so judgy of ourselves. And I see this all the time with people. I mean, I do marketing, so a lot of people ask me about content and things like that, and then they're trying to create this, like, I don't even know what they're trying to do, something huge, something groundbreaking from a content perspective, right? And you're like, the thing is, nobody sees the world the way you do. So if you see something and you say something, it is by nature profound to other people, because they can't think that. It's not possible. It's not me. You're thinking thoughts about what I'm saying right now, and it's impossible for me to think those exact same thoughts because I do not have the same experience. I do not have the same filters. I do not have the same personality, the whole bunch of things, right? I can't do that. The problem in identifying that from ourselves is we can only think our thoughts. And we're predisposed to think that they're basic because we think them all the time.
That's so true, yeah.
And so this is one of the reasons why I'm a huge fan of conversation, because quite often someone else hears you say something and then they're like, wow, I've like never heard that in that way before. That like just puts together a bunch of dots that I never could have put together myself. And this is what we miss out. And okay, I'm going to talk about the niche thing for a second because I would like the world to stop talking about it. The way we've interpreted it is not helpful whatsoever, because we've interpreted it from a demographic point of view, an age range, an industry, for a business perspective. Like, these are not helpful ways to like narrow down your gifts and what makes you unique, right? I'm not unique because I'm a marketing consultant. I think there's like 1.7 million of us on LinkedIn. Like, that does not make me unique. It doesn't even make me, I used to be unique at the Authentic Marketing Advisor thing because I made it up, but now there's 2 of us on LinkedIn. Someone copied it, right? Like, that's going to happen, right? That's not your uniqueness. Your uniqueness is your authentic beingness. And it is like your energy that you can exchange with people when you are just being. You're not thinking about who you're supposed to be in this scenario. You're just being yourself. And for most people, there's actually some place in their life where they get to do that. Is it all places? No. But honestly, it's not even all places for me. Right? I go into like networking rooms and I feel the vibe and I'm like, wow, this is like not my room. And again, now I have the gall just to be like, peace out. But my first experience of that was like 10 years ago. I created this cardio dance class and I was working in corporate and I was in a like not good relationship at the time. And I didn't feel like myself most of the time. But I felt called to create this dance class. And so I created an abstract for it. I just sent it out to like a bunch of rec centers to see if anyone would pick it up. Trico Center picked it up. And so I was like, okay, cool. Someone wants this. And I got to create it from scratch. And there's no one has any expectations of what this is. They don't know me, right? Like I'm a new energy, a new vibe. So I can just like go in there and do what I want, and we'll see if people like it. And quite honestly, it was like Trico's longest running registered class for a very long time. And now they've restructured how they do things, so it might be different now. But at the time it was. And that's because I created it was Tracy's energy in a room, right? And what people were actually buying was being in my energy. And yes, we danced and there was fun music and I took song requests and all of these things. But that's because I am who I am. Right? Like, I like variety, so we never did the same songs twice, and versus Zumba, which was like always the same musical repertoire. And I was like, this is boring, so I would do it this way. And then people get to listen to like the popular music on the radio station and be able to identify like, oh, this is a salsa, or this is a rumba, or this is a polka, or whatever. And they could go dancing, right? And are people gonna go dance? I don't think people do that anymore. That's how my parents met, so it's like, I kind of wish people did that more still, but like, I don't think they will. But now, like, I have students who still will message me and be like, I heard this on the radio. I think it's a waltz, is it? I'm like, yes, you're right. The point being, okay, so it's like, it's a authentic representation of me. And in that moment, like, having that space allowed me to feel good in that space. And then I could like start to identify what about that space makes me feel good and how can I extrapolate that into other parts of my life. And sometimes that means like I got divorced. I left my corporate job. Right? I have found my authenticity. Those 2 things were kind of a prison for my authenticity. I could not get to a point where I was fully expressed in that. And part of that was me, right? Like part of that was my experience of what it's like to work in corporate, or my experience of what it's like to be in this relationship.
Yeah.
But like I had to get away from that to find my real self. And now I'm in a like really amazing marriage, and I have a wonderful kid, and I've created my own business, and which is not the easiest thing to do. I don't want to say that that's the right path for everybody.
Yeah.
But going through that process of figuring out like what's stopping me from expressing myself, and how can I incorporate more of that expression into the world, even if it's just like I go for walks in the morning and I make my own playlist. I make my own empowerment playlists, and it's fun. The music it helps with the movement, and like it's a good way for me to get connected to myself in the morning, so I can hit the day where I don't know what's going to happen, and I have to parent, and I have to take care of my grandma, and there's like a whole bunch of stuff that I have to do. I have responsibilities, most adults do, but I can start by connecting to who am I and my beingness, and me walking around. Oh my gosh, it's raining today, so there's not as many people out on my walk this morning, but there was an older gentleman like in a power chair going around the lake.
Awesome.
And he went by me and he was like, I'm so glad to see you today. And I've never seen him before, so it's not like we know each other, but he was like, there's no one else out here. And I'm like, yeah, well, the weather's not great. And he's like, I'm glad you're out here. And I'm like, if that is the thing I did today that could just like have another person feel seen, then that feels like very Tracy, right?
Yeah.
And then I got to go back to the rest of my day and be like, okay, I get to use that as like an anchor for what do I do today? And I'm having client meetings, and I'm meeting new people, and I'm going on a podcast, and like I'm going to a networking event, and how can I like feel that feeling again? And just bring it into the rest of the things.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like intuition, which is super interesting, because when I had shared that on the hike about like my unique things, like I really struggle with that. That was the feedback that I received. They're like, we see you as somebody, and this is multiple people, that's why I'm saying we see, but multiple people told me like that they could just see it in me, that I am very intuitive in like other people's energy and what I need to bring to other people's energy, which is something that I really, really resonate with, but I didn't make that connection at that time when I was trying to do that, of that, just that intuition. And it's something that I'm really trying to learn more about in my life as well, because that, like, I feel like when I do pay attention to that gut feeling, that intuition, that you do end up making decisions that just feel more like me. And there's this big question, you alluded to it earlier, of who am I? This big, like, daunting question that we all go through of who am I? Like, what am I meant to do? Like, who am I? What's my unique thing? And it sounds like a lot of that is based out of intuition and just curiosity, intuition, and discovery.
Well, a couple of things there. So one, again, having people reflect back to you is super helpful. So whenever you can get that, accept it.
Yeah.
But the other thing that's more important about that is that when you hear something and you like what you hear, right? So like, one of the things I hear all the time is that I'm refreshing. It actually had a new person I chatted with today for the first time who told me that. And I was like, from the first time I heard it, I love it, right? Like, I love to provide new perspectives and new ideas and new conversations. And so when someone reflects something like that back to you and you can like feel it hit, like that's meaningful to you, keep track of that. Like, write it down on Post-it notes, stick it on your computer, or stick it on your mirror, and being like, I am refreshing. When we talk about like making those I am statements, these are the things that answer the who am I question, right? I am refreshing. And it's not all of who I am by any means, but it gives you something to start that process with. And I also, personally, I think who am I is too big of a question, right? And even if you're trying to develop this from a brand perspective, like, it's too big of a question. And we're so many things.
It's so true,
But when we ask ourselves instead the question, what would I do? Right? So this is happening right now. what would I do? Would I get upset about this? Would I try to run away? Would I say something? Like, what would I do?
Yeah.
You may not have the courage or the skills or the tool set to do that thing, but having that moment of saying, like, I would stand up for this, right? Then you take that away.
Is this me too?
Right.
Right. Yeah, that resonates. Yeah, sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
And like asking those types of questions, the who am I question is a sum of all of those things. So trying to figure out the end state when you don't know the inputs is almost impossible. But what we can do is identify the inputs as we go. Yeah. And there isn't one thing I am, right? Like, I'm a mom, I am a marketer, I am a wife, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a granddaughter, I'm a friend, I'm a, like, I could go on forever, right? Like, I am many things. Who am I isn't one thing. Yeah. Who am I is Tracy Borreson. And there's a lot of things that make up Tracy Borreson, and I'm discovering new ones every day. But the fun is in getting excited about discovering those things, and they're in you, right? It's actually, so like 3 years ago, I did a TED Talk on authenticity, and started off with like, your personal brand is in you right now. All you need to be authentic is inside of you. It doesn't have to come from outside. There's nothing coming from someone else that can make you more authentic. What makes us the most authentic is the peeling away of what is not us. The things that we have had expectations placed on us year over year. And like, from a marketing perspective, this is like next level, right? Because you have all these like personal expectations you've placed on yourself and who you are as a person, and then you layer on a business on top, and then you're like, well, this is what it looks like to be professional, or this is what everyone else in my industry is doing, and all you're doing is adding on more layers of who you should be, instead of peeling away the layers to get to who you are.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, it's almost like that question of who am I puts us in a box, and then all the shoulds get piled on top of the box. It's like, how do we ever open the box then to like discover and to create and to do all these things? So super interesting. Really appreciate that insight.
I feel like the answer is your name, right? Who am I? I am Tracy. Who is that? There's a whole, let's talk about it.
Yeah. I love that. Okay, there's something I want to do before. I want to be respectful of your time, but so I just started this recently. So my last guest wrote a question for you.
Okay.
I haven't read the question. I don't know what it is.
Okay.
So I'm going to read the question to you.
Okay.
And we'll get your answer. And then when we're done here, then I'll get you to write a question for my next guest.
Ooh, fun.
Does that sound good?
Yes.
All right. So I haven't read this yet, so hopefully I can read their writing.
That'd be good.
All right. They say, tell me about a time when times were tough. Who did you lean on, and how did they help you?
Oh man, which time do I want to choose? Because there's lots of times that have been tough. I will talk about this, and I will try not to get too emotional.
Okay.
When I left my first marriage, I went and I stayed with my sister, and we are 2 years apart. Growing, I'm the oldest, she's the middle. Growing up, we were not friends. Right? We ran in completely different circles. We really had no relationship with each other until we were adults. We have very different lifestyle even as adults. But I remember having a conversation with her. It's so funny how like we have these high definition moments, and like dates are so clear, right? Like on December 10th, I went to National with her, and we sat and we talked about like all of these struggles that I was having with. And I remember her just sitting there and being like, you can come and stay with me, right? Like, what, like, you just tell me, I'll get you a key, we'll get you a parking pass. Like, what, like, just, if it's that bad, don't stay there. And then there was a whole bunch of other stuff that happened. And then on January 14th, I came back from a work trip, and it was like the biggest disaster. I mean, it ended up being okay, but like nothing went as planned, and flights got missed and hotels got unbooked, and like, anyway, the fact that the presentation I was there to do actually went off without a hitch is kind of insane. But like, it was so stressful, and I came home and I was just hoping that like someone would be home when I got home, because like my ex knew that this was, I had talked to him. It was all stressful this whole time, and it was not there. It was January in Calgary. The house is dark. There's slippery path, right? And I was just like, I'm done. Right? So I called my sister. She came and picked me up, and it was just like, you didn't even need to ask, right? Like, she was there no matter what. And I remember speaking about it at her wedding and like crying so hard because I was just like, a lot of times in my life, I have experienced that I had to earn things, and I didn't think that I deserved a lot of things. I didn't think I deserved help for that kind of scenario. And I didn't have to do anything except like be myself. And she loves me and I love her, and this is what sisters do. We just like help each other. We're not like friends, right? Like, you do that. And it was amazing. And like, quite honestly, the entire experience changed how I saw myself, changed how I saw relationships. Like, her and her husband had this relationship that they weren't married at the time, but they would play and they would laugh and they would like, and I was like, oh, this isn't just in the movies, right? It like actually changed my entire perspective of what a relationship could look like. And she gifted me that. Like, honestly, I lived there for free for 5 months. Besides, I like did the dishes and cooked them scones. Although then my brother-in-law was like, you can live here forever because this is amazing. But like, it also goes to show you like how you can just be yourself. And like, I like to do the dishes. I like to cook scones. So I do that. And he's like, this is so great because both of us hate to do the dishes and we never cook any of the time because we're both lawyers and we're always at work. And like, oh, like people can be compatible just by like being themselves. And I think it set like a completely different trajectory for the rest of my life. And I can like never ever thank her enough for, I'm sure she would look back on it now and be like, it was no problem, right? Nothing, yeah. But like, this is also the thing. I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine, Carl Sean Watkins. He talks a lot about vulnerability on LinkedIn, and he shared this thing that his grandmother used to tell him, which was that people want to help you, right? Like you go out into the world with your empathy. I go out into the world. I want to help people, right? Like, if there's a way for me to help you, I would like to do that. I think most people are like that. And most of the time we don't give them the opportunity to be helpful, which means like they also don't get to express part of their beautiful gift for the world. So like, what if we could just let people help and ask for help and take away that whole ego piece of it and that I need help and just say like, hey, like my people want to help me. Yeah. Can I let them and give them that joy? And it's pretty amazing gift you can give back to people.
That's awesome. That's beautiful. Yeah, and I appreciate your vulnerability there. It really is like a beautiful kind of way to encompass this conversation of like having the support around and just being authentically you and being able to accept help, give help. And really, like, I agree 100%. I think that's what people want to do. That's kind of the meaning of life, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Is there anything that hasn't been said that you were hoping to say before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I wanted to share the complexities of authenticity. One of the things I often say is that authenticity doesn't just turn on like a light switch, right? A lot of times I think people look at it and they're like, well, this is about me, so I should just know how to be authentic. And that's not a thing. We have to build the skill. We have to be curious. We have to ask ourselves questions. We have to get it wrong before we figure it out. And we will never accomplish the thing if we don't go through that process. So it's not an easy road. I should not say that. It's like at the end of the day, I think it's one of the most beneficial things you can put your time and effort into. It takes time and effort. So just be cognizant of that. Don't give up. Like, keep going on the journey. It's a lifelong journey. It only ends when you die. There's no pinnacle of authenticity. You experience a new thing. You learn how you would deal with that or not deal with that. And just, it's an ongoing journey. And then once you have the skill set, it's easier to go on the journey. And actually, it's pretty fun. And surround yourself with people who are on the journey. Right? Like, no two people are on the same part of the path. So there will always be people who feel like they're ahead, and there will always be people who feel like they're behind. But if you're on the journey of people being on the journey together, it can be super helpful.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This was so fun. I could talk to you for hours, I feel like. So we'll have to do it again sometime.
Sounds good.
And we can get deep into some nooks and crannies of lots of different things. But yeah, I just want to say thank you again for being here. This was awesome. And thanks everybody for listening and watching. And we'll see you in the next episode.